Alright guys, now we're going to take a look at Feign Client. First, let's see what this Feign Client is. After that, we'll get into how to code with it. Feign Client is actually a part of the Spring Cloud Netflix project. It's a library developed to make it easy to send HTTP requests to RESTful services. The basic idea here is actually peer-to-peer communication. In other words, it's essentially a robust library specifically developed to effortlessly trigger a particular method in another distinct microservice from one microservice and subsequently obtain its corresponding response. Now, there are a few situations here, folks. As you know, with different libraries and different structures, people tend to do more event-driven coding and think that's somehow better. Now, friends, every library, every use case, every structure, every architecture actually reveals its strengths and weaknesses depending on the process being implemented. So, for example, in a structure like the out service I'm giving as an example right now, if you use an event-driven approach, the process actually becomes more difficult than with Feign Client. What do I mean by that? Now look, in event-driven architectures, you have to do things a certain way. You introduce a queue system into the environment. The out microservice first saves the components that need to be registered in the system. In other words, it saves the user to the database. Then it tells the queue, I've saved this person. Then, the other microservices that are listening to this start performing their own operations. Let's say, for example, 3 microservices are listening to this event. I mean, maybe there aren't that many, but let's say 3 microservices are listening to this queue. Then, one by one, they all carry out their operations. But one of them encounters a problem while processing. Let's say it's the user microservice, the user profile microservice. In this situation, the operations need to be rolled back. 3 microservices completed operations and saved to the database. The user profile microservice couldn't do it and failed to save. So what happens now? Of course, you can use different things here. For example, in Kafka's own structure, the messages sent to the queue are held there. But let's say the user microservice received this information, processed it, but couldn't succeed. What happens now? Well, it should try again. But what if it can't retry? What if there was a problem at that moment, and since it already read the queue, it can't read it again? What then? So here, you need to develop several models. Let's say this event didn't happen. What should happen then? The operations that were performed need to be rolled back. In other words, the out microservices need to be rolled back by the other 2 working microservices. This time, you'll have to trigger a reverse event. Since this doesn't happen end-to-end, you'll need to do a transaction. Of course, this transaction will be between microservices. It will work with a triggering logic. So, then? Well, then you'll have to roll everything back. So what happens when you do this peer-to-peer? The out microservice will have to wait for the user profile microservice to complete its operations. Or it will have to wait for the other 2 microservices as well. In other words, it will have to wait for everything to be completed. Afterwards, the result will be sent back to the out microservice, and the out microservice will say, okay, I've recorded the transaction. Look, friends, let's say someone is signing up. Can you really set up such a scenario during registration? The guy has come all the way to outer and signed up. Okay, you think, I've already notified Kafka with the message, this person has signed up, but this person doesn't have a profile. Let's say, for example, there was a problem with the profile and it couldn't be saved. Assume it's retried in the background. User logs in. I have my username and password. I'm logging in. Okay, they're trying to log in at that moment. Are they able to log in? Their information exists in the out microservice. After logging in, they can't get in. Why? Problems in the user microservice mean information is missing or inaccessible. Can you imagine? Why is it inaccessible? Profile info not created. So, there's an inconsistency here. Well, before the person is even allowed inside, the user profile microservice should tell the out microservice, "You didn't save this. I couldn't save this." And at that moment, it should tell the user, "An error occurred. Please try again." So, to ensure this, writing an event-driven architecture with a trigger afterwards wouldn't really be the right approach here. So, it's pretty clear here that the more appropriate method is actually a peer-to-peer approach. Of course, I'm saying this regardless of what kind of approach the developers want to take, friends. Some people, as I mentioned, might prefer to use an event-driven method. So, what exactly does the Feign client do in a peer-to-peer relationship? Well, what it actually does is this, friends. Here, a method in the user profile microservice triggers another method. But the method it triggers here is a REST API. So, I'm triggering a REST API from here. I'm saying, "Hey, I've saved this. Take this and that information, and you save it too." I'm sending the information. I'm triggering the REST API. After the REST API processes are done, it sends me a response. It says, "I've saved this." Based on this response, I say OK and send a reply to the user. So, the system actually works exactly like this. But what if there's a problem here? I mean, in this peer-to-peer, if there's an issue while going to the user profile, then this should already be a transaction. Since the operation couldn't be completed successfully, the transaction rolls back. It undoes all the operations. It undoes them. It tells the user that there was a problem and to please try again. If there's no problem when retried, the registration goes through. It responds to the user saying the registration was completed successfully. Friends, so let's be aware that Feign client is used this way, and in a moment, we'll also look at how to set it up.